Every puzzle has an answer.
Have you ever wondered how a villain is created? While every anime villain has their own reasons for being the antagonist in their story, some motivations are simply more compelling than others. Whether the end result is interesting or not doesn't matter when we're genuinely curious about the circumstances that pushed a character to do what they did. That's exactly how I feel about Heinkel. I really dislike him because of the role he plays in the story. If you've watched ReZero, I'm almost 100% sure you dislike him too. The anime goes out of its way to make him utterly despicable. However, things shift a bit in the novels. Not because he's a better person there, not at all. He's still a bastard, but you get a clearer sense of why he is the way he is. I believe Heinkel is the most complex character in the story after Subaru, unironically. Even the author seems to have a soft spot for this massive failure of a man. In fact, he said that if he were to write another story set in the world of ReZero, he'd choose Heinkel as the protagonist. In this video, I'm just going to talk about everything we know about Heinkel's life so far. I'll give you a quick rundown of all the existing lore about him up to this point. And yes, that includes the side novels, which not everyone has the patience to read. Just to be clear, I'm not trying to make Heinkel look good here. I'm one of those people who believes that ironically Heinkel wasn't written to be hated, at least not in the way most people think, but we'll get to that. I should also mention that for this video, I'll be drawing a lot from an animatic made by a Twitter user. Hey, so this is the story of the most hated guy in the ReZero world. The first sequence of the animatic is a bit confusing at first. It shows us the current state of Heinkel's life. If you're not up to speed with the novels, no worries. These scenes will all make sense once you've watched the video. For now, I just want to highlight the beautiful shot of Heinkel's eyes looking at his mom. That small detail matters because the guilt he feels toward her is something he'll carry with him for the rest of his life. The next part is a short sequence showing his birth. That single frame says a lot. Even though it's a family photo, it's impossible to ignore the absence of some grandparents. Her dad died while trying to save her, which is why we only see her mom, Tishua, in the scene. Another interesting detail is the sword placed in the center, the dragon sword reed. It's above Heinkel's head and clearly out of reach, a subtle visual motif that represents something that will follow him for the rest of his life. Heinkel's never going to be able to reach that sword. In the next scene, we see a young Wilhelm showing his newborn son the way of the sword. He copies the moves he used on Kurgan, and it's said that Heinkel was thrilled to see the blade moving in front of him. A more recent novel reveals that at that moment, Wilhelm actually lifted the newborn and brought him close to the edge of the sword, and Heinkel, still a baby, seemed overjoyed by the gesture. Wilhelm took this as a sign from the heavens, a sign that his son would surpass him one day. Unfortunately, that never happened. We should keep in mind that Wilhelm and Theresia were the best swordsmen of their time. Everyone thought their kid would be an absolute beast in battle. People had high hopes for Heinkel. Eventually, Theresia came in and got mad when she saw her husband teaching their new baby the way of the sword. Hey, just a friendly reminder that Theresia was basically forced into the sword's path, so she wasn't too thrilled about Wilhelm pushing that path on their kid so early. At the very least, she and the rest of the family agreed. It was way too soon for that. But she realized her precautions were pointless when Heinkel started crying the moment his dad stopped his sword performance. It was clear that the child really liked, maybe even loved, the sword from the moment he was born. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge Grimm's efforts in mediating during the dispute. We don't know much about Heinkel's childhood. Those years are mostly a mystery. We do know he trained hard with the sword. It was just his father's way of training him, and Heinkel always ended up in tears after those sessions. But Wilhelm didn't care. He kept pushing, thinking it would toughen his son up. They say Wilhelm never stopped training, even when Heinkel was crying. Of course, his wife would scold him for that later. I think childhood was the only happy part of Heinkel's life, the only time he could be genuinely happy. Back then, he could still say he didn't have much talent with the sword because he was just learning. But as he got older, that illusion started to fade, and I think the next scene makes that painfully clear. We go from a hopeful young Heinkel looking up at the dragon sword reed with wide-eyed optimism to an older Heinkel, now of age, realizing he's made no progress at all toward that goal. He doesn't seem to have the confidence he had as a child. The animatic doesn't show this part, but this frame happens shortly after Heinkel officially joins the Royal Guard. His first time as a knight was pretty embarrassing. During his first mission, which was a raid organized by the army, Heinkel completely froze when it was time to fight. He was paralyzed with fear. Another rookie soldier, Marcus, had to jump in and save his life. They say Heinkel was so scared that he even wet his pants. That's how his first mission ended. Of course, word spread throughout the kingdom. Heinkel felt like a total failure. He had embarrassed the legacy of House Astrea. He was so embarrassed that he avoided the soldiers' taverns, knowing his father's old comrades were probably in there laughing about his disaster of a debut. Instead, he put himself through training, day and night, away from home. He wasn't just trying to improve, he also didn't want to face his parents. Seeing them would just remind him of the disgrace he'd caused. A few months later, he met Luana Hartley, who would eventually become his wife. What's most interesting is how they met. Even though Heinkel was a pretty pathetic knight, Luana never saw him that way. She actually thought Heinkel was the greatest knight in the nation. Why? Because of how they first met. One day, Luana saw something she wasn't supposed to. She became the killer's target and had to go into hiding. While she was on the run, she crossed paths with a young Heinkel coming back from his late-night training. He was driven by a sense of duty, so he helped her and started investigating the crime she had witnessed. He stuck with her through thick and thin, even secretly keeping watch from the shadows to make sure the killer didn't come after her. But to be honest, his camouflage wasn't exactly perfect. Luana always noticed him. The relationship took a turn when the killer finally showed up. Mocking Heinkel, the man sneered and said he was surprised someone who pissed himself on his first mission had the guts to show up again. That comment really stung Heinkel, but what hurt even more was the idea of Luana finding out about his embarrassing past. But she didn't flinch. But she said that even knowing all that, she still thought Heinkel was a great knight because he'd been there for her and knew how to make her feel better when it mattered most. He's surprised by the faith this woman has in him, but then he curses his own weakness. Even though she sounded totally confident when she said all that, the truth is, she was shaking with fear the whole time. And he didn't notice it. He felt terrible about it. Heinkel decided not to back down, even when the killer said he had no intention of harming an Astrea. After hearing that, Heinkel used the weight of his family name to warn the man that the woman was his fiancée, and that he'd better not lay a finger on her. The killer fell silent for a moment, then praised Heinkel for his resolve before disappearing. That was when he met his future wife, and it was the first time he met someone who really supported his goals. It would be unfortunate if fate tore them apart, wouldn't it? It's interesting that the dynamic between Luana and Heinkel now looks a lot like the one between Rem and Subaru in Season 1. In the end, though, both women would end up in the same situation. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. And from that love, Reinhard was born, the strongest human in the world. His birth brought 2 years of pure happiness. This scene of the Astrea family celebrating together isn't actually described in the novels, but I can easily imagine it happening. Just like I can picture a scene where a proud father, Heinkel, stands beside his son, staring up at the sacred sword. Once more, the novels don't make this perfectly clear, but I think that when Reinhard was born, Heinkel was happy, and it also made him feel a bit less stressed. After all, now he wasn't the only Astrea who could carry on the bloodline of master swordsmen. Unfortunately, that's when his life starts going downhill. We're not sure how or why it happened, but at some point, Reinhard put his own mom into a coma. Heinkel is pretty much the only one who knows this. I'm pretty sure this is true because not even the side stories have suggested that anyone else knows that Reinhard caused this. To be honest, that's surprising because the Heinkel we know today is such a bastard. You'd expect him to shout it to the world. My son is the one who did this to his mother. But as far as we know, he hasn't. I like to think that even though he's become despicable, keeping that secret might be the last bit of love he still has for Reinhard. What's for sure is that from this point on, his life is about to take a nosedive. He was basically a single father to a 2-year-old, and while taking care of the kid, he was also desperately searching for a way to cure his wife. To make matters worse, around this time, Marcus left the Royal Guard. Heinkel thought he was a friend, so he was given the job of convincing him to come back. But Marcus only responded with insults. He told Heinkel straight up that he'd never thought of him as a friend, and that just because they were both students of the same master didn't mean there was some special connection between them. He also reminded Heinkel that, yes, he did save his life on that first mission. He made it clear, though, that it wouldn't happen again. But the most painful thing Marcus said was this. He didn't get why someone like Heinkel was still doing that. He said Heinkel didn't have the talent his parents had, and that he should just stop following a path that had been forced on him. In short, Marcus told him that the only reason he still held onto the sword was because he wanted to please others. But that's not really the case. Heinkel really loves the sword, and always has. But because he's not that talented, it's hard for others to believe that's the case. Heinkel got mad and tried to attack him, but Marcus didn't even try to defend himself. He just laughed and said he wouldn't counterattack because he knew Heinkel didn't have the strength or skill to kill him. That's why, in this picture, we see Heinkel crying as Marcus walks out of the room. But Heinkel's suffering that day wouldn't end there. If we look at the next picture, we see him hugging a young Reinhard while someone laughs from a distance. This all went down not long after his fight with Marcus. Reinhard noticed how sad his dad looked and asked if it would make him happy if his old friend returned to the army. Heinkel said yes. And that's when Reinhard, using his divine protection of mind-changing, made Marcus decide to come back. Unfortunately, this didn't go unnoticed. The future leader of the Six Tongues, a secret organization that watches over the kingdom, detected it. When the group saw that Reinhard had a divine protection that was against the rules in the kingdom, they showed up and threatened Heinkel and his family. Heinkel begged them to back off, promising he would personally make sure Reinhard never used that power again. Once they left, Reinhard saw one of them glaring at him from the shadows and muttering a chilling warning. "Serve the kingdom, for your family's sake." That moment would stick with the boy forever. Later on, there was the whole kidnapping of a royal family member situation. Wilhelm was assigned to the mission, but the white whale showed up right then. Usually, that job would have gone to the sword demon himself, but since Wilhelm was already working on the kidnapping investigation, the responsibility fell on the other Astrea, Heinkel. He was put in charge of leading the battle. Heinkel was, naturally, terrified. He had a bad rep in the army, and despite his training, he just wasn't that strong. He was also afraid of dying in battle. If that happened, who would take care of his wife? Who would raise their 5-year-old son? Theresia van Astrea, understanding the emotional weight crushing her son, made a decision. She pulled out her sword one last time and went in his place. This would be the last time Heinkel ever saw his mom alive. But that wouldn't be the only bad news. After this tragedy, his dad left the family and quit his job as commander of the Royal Guard. He did this to start his personal campaign against the White Whale. Heinkel was devastated, and he had to take charge of the Astrea household. It wasn't long before Reinhard finally got to start learning how to sword fight. And in his very first training session, the young Reinhard beat his dad. We're not exactly sure how Heinkel reacted, but it was probably a harsh reminder of how weak he really was in this world. We're not exactly sure when or why, but at some point after everything he'd been through, Heinkel turned into the broken man we know from the anime. Even so, he still showed traces of sorrow. For example, he verbally abused Felix's master for being unable to cure Luana. But when that man died, Heinkel felt guilty about how he'd treated him, something confirmed by the Crush of that era. After some of the stuff that happened in the Royal Selection arc, where Subaru made a fool of himself, Heinkel went to a village in Priscilla's area. He'd heard rumors of an artifact that could cure any illness. The text doesn't make it clear, but it's pretty obvious that he went there hoping to wake up his wife. On the way, he met Priscilla for the first time. That's when their alliance started. Heinkel promised her a way to get Reinhard out of the picture. And in exchange, Priscilla agreed to give him a portion of the dragon's blood held by the kingdom once she won. Now, given how awful Heinkel is, you'd expect him to treat Schult poorly. Schult is the little boy in Priscilla's faction, but there's actually clear evidence that he genuinely cares for Schult and treats him well. But just as things seemed to be looking up, the past caught up with him once again. This all went down in Season 3. Seeing his mom resurrected as a corpse brought all his guilt back to the surface. What should have been a moment that brought the family closer only ended up driving them further apart. Something interesting to note. In that fight where Theresia totally overwhelms her son, Heinkel never defends himself. Why? Deep down, he still blames himself for her death. This is confirmed later on when Theresia disappears, and Heinkel says she looked at all the men in the family with hatred. But that doesn't quite make sense, because when Theresia regained her consciousness, she never showed signs of hatred. So if Heinkel says that, it's probably because he still feels unworthy. He's projecting his guilt onto her. A fascinating little detail was recently revealed. Heinkel never goes to visit his mom's grave on the anniversary of her death. Instead, he always goes one day later. It's not that he wants to avoid the rest of the family, but he doesn't feel worthy of visiting her on that day. Then we get to the events of the Wallachia arc, where we see Heinkel again. There's a lot to unpack here, but the most important thing is this. The amnesiac Rem notices that Heinkel still trains daily with the sword. He's a bit grumpy and doesn't like being around people, but he doesn't try to change that. We also see how much he still thinks about Luana every time he fails. At one point, after being beaten by an enemy, Heinkel gets up and we hear him say a few quiet words. He apologizes to Luana because he simply can't live up to the situation. After Priscilla died, it's obvious that this was another setback for Heinkel's hopes. She was his last shot at curing Luana, his last link to the dragon's blood. So, it's not hard to see why he said yes to Aldebaran's offer. He promised him the dragon's blood in exchange for his help with their plan. But beyond the betrayal itself, there's something else that must hurt even more. Ever since Heinkel became a social outcast, people knew he had changed. They gossiped, they looked down on him. But deep down, everyone still believed one thing, that no matter how far he'd fallen, Heinkel would never cross the line into true criminality. His old comrade Marcus used to say that. Other important knights of the kingdom did the same. But now that Heinkel helped Aldebaran, he crossed a line from which there's no return. Now, he's not just an outcast. He's someone who's openly been despised, even by his own allies. Yad really doesn't like him, and she's even willing to sacrifice him. She hasn't done it yet because Aldebaran told her not to. Schult would be devastated to see how far the once likable drunk who was kind to him has fallen. Amelia doesn't really know him, but she always tries to see the good in people. Even so, it's hard to imagine she'd have anything positive to say about someone who helped betray Subaru. Subaru already despised him. After this, that hatred will only grow. Garfield is a tricky case. He fought alongside Heinkel in the Wallachia arc and ended up respecting him a little. But finding out that Heinkel helped Aldebaran will probably shatter that respect. Felt already had a bad impression of Heinkel from past side stories, but even she says she doesn't judge his reasons. She says she would have helped wake Luana up anyway. Out of respect for Reinhard, Wilhelm is probably the most disappointed of all. His foolish son has just tarnished the legacy of his wife's family. And that's not even getting into Wilhelm's feelings as a father. Feelings that were crushed the day Heinkel stabbed him. And finally, the one person for whom Heinkel is doing all of this, Luana. She must be shocked at how much time has passed. And chances are she's about to wake up. Her name's been everywhere lately, and the author just dropped some new side stories about her. Could this be a sign that Reinhard's mom is about to come back? We'll find out soon enough if she can still love the guy who betrayed the kingdom and the world just for her. Honestly, Heinkel's story is a fascinating one. Behind that despicable man we see on the surface is someone who once aspired to greatness. He just wanted to make his parents proud, but nothing he tried ever worked out. The only thing he ever did right was with his wife, and even she ended up in a coma. I see his whole life as this desperate struggle of a man doing everything he can to protect the only person who ever truly believed in him, even if it means turning against the whole world. And if I can say one thing, I don't think Heinkel is a character who was written to be hated. I think Heinkel is a character who was written to be understood. At first, the story shows us his worst, most monstrous sides, but the deeper you read into the novels, the more you begin to understand the reasons behind his actions. And you realize that the world was really cruel to him. It's no accident that Heinkel is one of the author's favorite characters. I think the reason for that is that Heinkel is like a version of Subaru, only without the power to redo anything. It's no coincidence that a lot of the bad stuff that happens to Reinhard's dad is similar to what our main character goes through. To wrap things up, I'll just say this. I get that the world can be tough, but that doesn't mean you should start acting like a jerk. Reinhard also suffered a lot from the world, but he still tries to be a good person. But maybe that's the whole point of ReZero. It shows us that not everyone takes the same path. I really hope people keep thinking Heinkel's a bad guy, but I also hope they understand the reasons behind his actions. Here's one final thought. What do you think about Heinkel's redemption? This is something that's definitely going to happen, because in one of the futures Amelia saw, she witnesses Reinhard speaking proudly and kindly about his father. It seems the author has something planned that will change the way we all see Heinkel. Personally, I think that's a double-edged sword. Because tell me, what kind of action would Heinkel have to take for the audience to forget that he endangered innocent lives in Pristella, or that he stabbed his own father? Before wrapping up the video, I want to thank the user Mason, who donated via PayPal to help cover the cost of the AI used for the voiceover. I'm still not confident enough with my English-speaking skills, and translating my videos from Spanish to English means I have to pay for a subscription to the software. So truly, thank you. I'd also really appreciate it if you could leave a like and a comment. It might not seem like much, But those small interactions can make all the difference between a video succeeding or not. So, tell me, what do you think of Heinkel's life after watching this video?